Never mind. We try to do it. Okay. Number 18, Sutta number 18, Majjhima Nikaya, Madhupindika Sutta, the HoneyBall. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country at Kapilavatthu in the Nigroda Spa. Then when it was morning, the Blessed One dressed, and taking his bowl and outer robe, went into Kapilavatthu for alms. The outer robe is what you are wearing. This is a shivon, this is the outer robe. When he had wandered for alms in Kapilavatthu and had returned from his alms round, after his meal he went to the great wood for the day's abiding, and entering the great wood, sat down at the root of a bilva sapling for the day's abiding. Dandapani, the Sakyan, while walking and wandering for exercise, also went to the great wood. And when he had entered the great wood, he went to the bilva sapling, where the Blessed One was, and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he stood at one side, leaning on his stick, and asked the Blessed One, "What does the recluse assert? What does he proclaim?" And the Buddha said, "Friend, I assert and proclaim such that one does not quarrel with anyone in the world, with its gods, its maras, and its brahmas. In this generation, with its recluses and Brahmins, its princes and its people, such that perceptions no more underlie that Brahmana who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, shorn of worry, free from craving for any kind of being." I'll stop here for a moment. So here the Buddha is asked, what does he teach? Then the Buddha says, he teaches that he teaches such that he does not quarrel with anyone, and also his teaching is such that perceptions no more underlie the Brahmana. Here the Brahmana, this word Brahmana originally referred to the Brahmana caste, the Brahmin caste. Originally the Brahmana caste were ascetics, ascetics, recluses. So later they were employed by the king to be advisors. So they did not practice the spiritual path anymore. So later that this Brahmana caste came to be called Brahmins. But this word Brahmana can mean the Brahmin caste as was used originally, or it can mean the religious person, the ascetic, or the recluse, or the monk. So here, when the word Brahmana is used, it means the religious man. So the Buddha says that his teaching is such that perceptions no more underlie the Brahmana who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, shorn of worry, free from craving for any kind of being. When this was said, Dandapani the Sakyan shook his head, wagged his tongue, and raised his eyebrows until his forehead was puckered in 3 lines. Then he departed, leaning on his stick. But obviously he didn't know what the Buddha was talking about. He was so bewildered. Then when it was evening, the Blessed One rose from meditation and went to Nigroda's park, where he sat down on a seat made ready for him, and told the monks what had taken place. Then a certain monk asked the Blessed One, "But Venerable Sir, what is that the Blessed One asserts, whereby one does not quarrel with anyone in the world, with its gods, its maras, and brahmas, in this generation with its recluses and Brahmins, its princes and its people? And Venerable Sir, how is it that perceptions no more underlie that Brahmana, who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, shorn of worry, free from craving for any kind of being?" So here this monk also didn't understand, so he asked the Buddha to explain. And the Buddha said, "Monks, as to the source through which perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man, if nothing is found there to delight in, welcome or hold to, this is the end of the underlying tendency to lust, of the underlying tendency to aversion, of the underlying tendency to views, of the underlying tendency to doubt, of the underlying tendency to conceit, of the underlying tendency to desire for being, of the underlying tendency to ignorance. This is the end of resorting to rods and weapons, of quarrels, brawls, disputes, recrimination, malice, and false speech. Here these evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. That is what the Blessed One said. Having said this, the Sublime One rose from his seat and went into his dwelling. So here the Buddha says that source from which perceptions and notions arise, if nothing is delighted in there, if you do not delight in that source, welcome or hold on to it, that is the end of the underlying tendencies to lust, aversion, etc. Then soon after the Blessed One had gone, the monks considered, now friends, the Blessed One has arisen from his seat and gone into his dwelling, after giving a summary in brief without expounding the detailed meaning. Now who will expound this in detail? Then they considered, the Venerable Mahakachana is praised by the teacher and esteemed by his wise companions in the holy life. He is capable of expounding the detailed meaning. Suppose we went to him and asked him the meaning of this. Then the monks went to the Venerable Mahakachana and exchanged greetings with him. When this courteous and amiable talk was finished, they sat down to one side and told him what had taken place, adding, that the Venerable Mahakachana expounded to us. The Venerable Mahakachana replied, friends, it is as though a man needing hardwood, seeking hardwood, wandering in search of hardwood, thought that hardwood should be sought for among the branches and leaves of a great tree standing possessed of hardwood, after he had passed over the root and the trunk. So it is with you, Venerable Sirs, that you think that I should be asked about the meaning of this, after you pass the Blessed One by, when you were face to face with the teacher. For knowing the Blessed One knows, seeing he sees. He is vision, he is knowledge, he is the Dhamma, he is the Holy One. He is the sayer, the proclaimer, the elucidator of meaning, the giving of the deathless, the Lord of the Dhamma, the Tathagata. That was the time when you should have asked the Blessed One the meaning. As he told you, so you should have remembered it. I'll stop here for a moment. So here Venerable Mahakachana is saying, you had the Buddha in front of you and you never asked him. It's just like the hardwood is in front of you and you don't know that it is hardwood. You go and look for the leaves and the branches, which is worthless. So he's saying, I'm like the leaves and the branches. The Buddha is the enlightened one now. Why you ask me? Then they said, surely friend Kachana, knowing the Blessed One knows, seeing he sees, he is vision, etc., the Tathagata. That was the time when we should have asked the Blessed One the meaning. As he told us, so we should have remembered it. Yet the Venerable Mahakachana is praised by the teacher and esteemed by his wise companions in the holy life. The Venerable Mahakachana is capable of expounding the detailed meaning of this summary given in brief by the Blessed One without expounding the detailed meaning. Let the Venerable Mahakachana expound it without finding it troublesome. Then listen, friends, and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, friend, the monks replied. The Venerable Mahakachana said, friends, when the Blessed One rose from his seat and went into his dwelling after giving a summary in brief without expounding the detailed meaning, that is, monks, as to the source through which perceptions and notions tinge my mental proliferation beset a man. If nothing is found there to delight in, welcome and hold to, this is the end of the underlying tendency to lust, etc. This is the end of resorting to rods and weapons. Here those evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. I understand the detailed meaning of it to be as follows. Dependent on the I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the tree is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. What one feels, that one perceives. What one perceives, that one thinks about. What one thinks about, that one mentally proliferates. With what one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man with respect to past, future, and present forms, recognizable through the eye. Dependent on the ear and sounds, dependent on the nose and odors, dependent on the tongue and flavors, body and tangibles, dependent on the mind and mind objects. Similarly, the meeting of the tree is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. What one feels, that one perceives. What one perceives, that one thinks about. What one thinks about, one mentally proliferates. With what one has mentally proliferated as the source, perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man with respect to past, future, and present. So here, let's stop here for a moment. So here what the Mahakachana is saying is that our six sense bases has these six sense objects. So the meeting of the sense object with the sense base causes the consciousness to arise. So when consciousness arises, it is followed by feeling, perception, proliferation. So that's basically what he says. So it is the contact of the sense object with the sense base that causes this feeling, perception, etc. to arise. And he continues, when there is the I, a form and I consciousness, it is possible to point out the manifestation of contact. When there is the manifestation of contact, it is possible to point out the manifestation of feeling. When there is the manifestation of feeling, it is possible to point out the manifestation of perception. When there is the manifestation of perception, it is possible to point out the manifestation of thinking. When there is the manifestation of thinking, it is possible to point out the manifestation of being, beset by perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation. Similarly, when there is the ear, sound and ear consciousness, when there is the nose, odor and nose consciousness, etc., it is possible to point out the manifestation of feeling, perception, thinking, etc., mental proliferation. When there is no I, no form and no I consciousness, it is impossible to point out the manifestation of contact. When there is no manifestation of contact, it is impossible to point out the manifestation of feeling. When there is no manifestation of feeling, it is impossible to point out the manifestation of perception. When there is no manifestation of perception, it is impossible to point out the manifestation of thinking. When there is no manifestation of thinking, it is impossible to point out the manifestation of being beset by perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation. Similarly, when there is no ear, no sound and no ear consciousness, no nose, no odor and no nose consciousness, etc. So here, basically what he is saying is that when there is the sense basis and the sense objects, feeling, perception, thinking, etc. arise. But when there is no sense base and no sense object, then there is no contact. Because of no contact, there is no feeling, no perception, no thinking, no mental proliferation. Friends, when the Blessed One rose from his seat and went into his dwelling, after giving a summary in brief, without expounding the detailed meaning, that is, monks, as to the source through which perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man, if nothing is found there to delight in, welcome and hold to, that is the end of the underlying tendency to lust, of the underlying tendency to aversion, of the underlying tendency to views, of the underlying tendency to doubt, of the underlying tendency to conceit, of the underlying tendency to desire for being, of the underlying tendency to ignorance. This is the end of resorting to rods and weapons, of quarrels, brawls, disputes, recrimination, malice and false speech. Here these evil, unwholesome states cease without remainder. I understand the detailed meaning of this summary to be thus. Now friends, if you wish, go to the Blessed One and ask him about the meaning of this. As the Blessed One explains it to you, so should you remember it. Then the monks, having delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Mahakachana's words, rose from their seats and went to the Blessed One. After paying homage to him, they sat down to one side and told the Blessed One all that had taken place after he had left, adding, "Then, Venerable Sir, we went to the Venerable Mahakachana and asked him about the meaning. The Venerable Mahakachana expounded the meaning to us with these terms, statements, and phrases. And the Buddha said, Mahakachana is wise, monks. Mahakachana has great wisdom. If you had asked me the meaning of this, I would have explained it to you in the same way that Mahakachana explained it. That is the meaning of this. So should you remember it. When this was said, the Venerable Ananda said to the Blessed One, Venerable Sir, just as if a man exhausted by hunger and weakness came upon a honey ball, in the course of eating it, he would find a sweet, delectable flavor. So too, Venerable Sir, any able-minded monk, in the course of scrutinizing with wisdom the meaning of this discourse on the Dhamma, would find satisfaction and confidence of mind. Venerable Sir, what is the name of this discourse on the Dhamma? As to that, Ananda, you may remember this discourse on the Dhamma as the honey ball discourse. That is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. It's the end of the sutta. So basically here, I guess when the Buddha says that firstly, when he teaches the Dhamma, he does not quarrel with anyone in the world. There is one sutta, one interesting sutta, I'm not sure whether it is Anguttara Nikaya or Samyutta Nikaya, I forgot, where the Buddha says, the world quarrels with me, I do not quarrel with the world. He who teaches the Dhamma does not quarrel with the world. Why does the Buddha say he does not quarrel with the world? Because I think a lot of external set teachers have found fault with the Buddha. So they want to quarrel with the Buddha, saying, criticize the Buddha and all that. But the Buddha says, because when the Buddha taught the Dhamma, he contradicted a lot of other teachings. So because he contradicted a lot of other teachings, the other external sect teachers were not happy with him. So they found fault with him, criticized him and all that. So it's as though he has a big quarrel with them. But the Buddha says, he does not quarrel with them, they quarrel with me. The Buddha says, he who teaches the Dhamma does not quarrel with the world. So here the Buddha says he does not quarrel with anyone. Secondly, he says that he teaches such a teaching that perceptions no more underlie the Brahmana, the holy man, who abides detached from sensual pleasures, without perplexity, shorn of worry, free from craving. So the Buddha's teaching is such that if a monk practices it, then he abides detached from sensual pleasures. And when he is detached from sensual pleasures, then he is without the perceptions, perplexity, worries, craving for any kind of being. Also, later the Buddha said, as to the source to which perceptions and notions tinged by mental proliferation beset a man, if nothing is found there to delight in, welcome and hold on to, this is the end of the underlying tendency to lust, to aversion, to views, to doubt, etc. So here, I guess what he's saying, the source from which perceptions and notions arise is the sense objects, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, and thoughts. If we delight in those things, because we tend to delight in worldly things, like beautiful sights, rock music, perfume, good food and all that. We delight in these worldly things. Then the underlying tendency to lust, aversion, views, doubt, everything all arise. So the Buddha says that if we do not delight in these things, the source of all these mental proliferations, that is the end of quarrels and brawls and disputes, etc. Okay, we stop here for tonight. Any questions? I suggest that some of you, if you are able to, go and get this Majjhima Nikaya book. We're going to continue that for the next 3 months. So try to get this book. Okay, any questions? Sutta number 18, not chapter, sutta. Not cut, we don't delight in it. No? Don't delight, don't cling in sight, sound, smells and all that. No? The Buddha says somewhere that the cause of the round of rebirths is craving for delighting in this and that. The normal person, because life is very boring, life is, Buddha says, life is dukkha. So for the normal person, we are always trying to find amusement. We delight in this. If you just stay at home and do nothing, you find so boring. You must watch the Astro, or you watch the football, or you go out karaoke. At least also teh tarik. Go and sembang. So we distract ourselves from the dukkha, because if you just do nothing, then you feel dukkha. Life is dukkha. So we find it unbearable. So we tend to want to look for pleasure here and there. That's why the Buddha says, always delighting in this and that, changing. You enjoy something also, after some time, it becomes boring already. And you get more of it, it becomes a nuisance already. For example, you listen to music. Music is very nice. But it plays non-stop. You find irritating already. If it plays 24 hours a day, it's suffering already. So you have to change. So that's why we always delight in this and that, always changing. It's just that for the normal person, we don't have the Buddha's instructions. For a normal person who does not know the Dhamma, he does not know how to analyze, how to see this. But because we have the Buddha's instructions, the Buddha tells us, then we go and observe. Life is like that. Okay, stop for now. It's getting late.